If you're solving a problem that is meaningful to people, you can't have a product if you don't have that. The next most important thing is the go-to-market. If you can convince people that you will solve that problem for them, you can sell it.
You're listening to Brainwork Framework, a business and marketing podcast, brought to you by focus-biz.com.
Welcome back to another episode. With us today is the founder of Confidence and Impact, Nils Davis. We're going to be talking all about resumes, product management, go-to-market, and storytelling within your brand and your personal life. Nils, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Hey, it's my pleasure to be here, Chris. I'm feeling great and excited to talk about all the different topics that you just mentioned.
I love it. Absolutely. I know it's going to be a huge value add for our audience and people listening out there. We always like to get inside the mind of the entrepreneur. What were you doing before, and how did that kind of lead you and prepare you for what you're doing today?
Yeah, so I've been an enterprise software product manager for about 30 years until December 2023. And I had a number of jobs. I was laid off a few times, tried a few businesses, this and that, learned a lot, and did things like wrote a book about product management for people that are getting into it, had a blog, have a podcast, all that kind of stuff. But since December 2023, started to do was work with people, with product managers who are in the jobs hunt and having problems, not getting interviews. And this started sort of just as doing some nice stuff for people. But I started to see some patterns in people's resumes. Essentially, they were really boring, basically. And what was interesting in the conversations I had with these people is they all were amazing. They all had done amazing things that had amazing accomplishments that were worth talking about. And those accomplishments didn't really show up on their resumes. And so I applied some ideas that I had learned a few years earlier about storytelling. I was never a natural storyteller and I had to learn to do it, but I was able to apply these ideas to help people make resumes that are much more exciting. And not only are they more exciting and more engaging for the reader, the people feel much better about their resumes when they start to see how their stories really, the things that they did, they typically don't really understand how to talk about the impact they've had. So I have a stories framework and a way of eliciting the stories, and we turn that into resume stuff. And that's what I've been doing for the last year. It's a small business so far, growing. And I characterize it as a go-to-market business, right? So this is people going to market for themselves. I also work with companies who are going to market with their products. And companies, for example, they have a product. It hasn't really gotten traction in the market, but they have some successful customers. A lot of the problems those companies have are really go-to-market problems. Partly they're not telling stories correctly. Partly they're not targeting their marketing correctly, et cetera. So I help companies like that as well. And the reason I call the company Confidence and Impact is that in the process of doing this, everybody gains confidence about their thing, whether it's a product or themselves, and they start to talk about the impact they're having as opposed to the features and functions.
Absolutely. That is quite the journey. And I love that you're just now getting into business. It's never a bad time to get into business. I feel like we all try these different opportunities. When we see them, we want to take advantage of them and try to have the most impact. A lot of overlap between the go-to-market for a business and a person. We're really trying to present ourselves in the best way possible, make sure that message resonates with that audience. But we just need that clarity sometimes to, okay, what job do I really want? How do I really highlight what I've done? But it's hard for us to self-reflect on a lot of that. Where do you see some of that overlap between the go-to-market for a business and a person? What should people be focusing on when they're really trying to put something new out there or put themselves out there?
Well, so there's a number of different overlaps and aspects of this. So you mentioned a couple of them. One of them is when you're selling a product, you need to sell it to the right people and not try to sell it to the wrong people. This is a big waste of money, waste of time. You'll be unhappy. And if your marketing is not targeting the right segment, you won't be successful. Or if the right segment can't recognize themselves in your marketing, again, you're not going to be successful. So one of the things that I talk to people about is being very clear on their resume about their value proposition, which is a technical term. It's from Crossing the Chasm, maybe earlier than that. But it basically says, I am a type of role. I've got certain kinds of experience and I know the job and I have a differentiator. Most people are very poor at that whole thing, right? They don't say I'm a senior product manager with 10 years of experience in a certain set of domains. They say I'm a product leader or I'm a product strategist, which is not what somebody's hiring for, right? So that's usually the first line of the resume. And already you're off on the wrong foot with the hiring manager. Because they say, I'm not looking for a product leader, or what does product leader really mean? So tell me, if you're going for a senior product manager role and you're qualified for it, say, I'm a senior product manager. The hiring manager then says, oh, at least the first two words are the right thing. So that's the first thing. Nobody ever puts a real differentiator on their resume. They try, but it's usually the same. Well, all they're doing is they're saying, like in the product management world, I'm customer obsessed, I'm dynamic, I'm self-starter. Well, those are minimum qualifications for a product manager. They're not differentiating at all. So when I work with people, it's like, what is your differentiator? What makes you different? What makes you somebody the hiring manager might be a little more interested in learning more about? This turns out to be hard. People mostly don't know what their differentiators are, but in the process of going through the stories and whatnot, we can often come up with them. So that's just the first example. The value proposition, it's the first 3 lines of the resume. Most people's are just terrible and interchangeable and don't tell the hiring manager anything if they're not actively making the hiring manager annoyed.
Absolutely. You need to have those keywords specific and crafted to that audience. Otherwise, the message will just dissipate, falls on deaf ears. They have nothing to encourage them to continue reading your resume.
That is right. And you mentioned the word keywords, and it's an interesting thing. People always talk about, well, I have to have all the keywords in my resume. And that's actually not literally true. Or it's literally true, but in a way that most people don't think about. They say, well, you need to match the job description. But the job description is really a minimum set of functionality that the person needs. It's like if you're doing an RFP, right? If you have a product and you're filling in an RFP, and the problem with RFPs is they say whether you have the basic functionality, but they don't allow you any place to say how that impacts the customer. It doesn't allow you to talk about differentiation, anything like that. The job description is the same way. In the world of product management right now, it's a hugely competitive market. Every job has hundreds of qualified people applying for it, which means that if they just work to the job description, all those resumes are interchangeable. That's not that interesting. The other thing to think about is when the hiring manager, and this is true for going to market with anything, but in this example, the hiring manager has gone to market trying to find somebody to be a product manager. Well, in order to get that rec approved, they had to go to leadership and say, hey, we have this big problem. And if I don't get funding for a $200,000 plus job rec, we're going to fail as a company, or this whole business is not going to succeed. So imagine what type of problems those might be. It might be competitive problems or market share problems or customers unhappy, whatever they might be. Guess what doesn't show up in the resume? Guess what doesn't show up in the job description? The hiring manager is not going to put into the job description, oh, we are suffering so badly because we don't know how to do this thing, so I need to get a product manager. They're not going to put that. So if you're building your resume off the job description, you won't be talking about the problems the hiring manager has. You'll be talking about things he doesn't really care about, he or she are required to in order to solve the problems. So what do I recommend to do this, to deal with this? Well, you think about the things that you did as a product manager, the successes, and your successes are always about having solved problems like that. Oh, I solved a market share problem. I solved this, we weren't selling, and I reversed that. And then you put that in as your bullet point, and you tell a little story about it. The story becomes the thing that hooks somebody in. And then the hiring manager reads that bullet point and they say, oh, I have that problem. Chris knows how to fix it. Maybe we should have Chris in for a conversation, right? That's your goal. Simply saying, oh, I did a thing and sales went up by 20%. That doesn't address that, because I don't know if the market was growing 20%, in which case I get no credit for that. But if I say, oh, we were losing market share, sales were declining, and all our customers were leaving, and I did some things, and sales went up by 20%. And, oh, by the way, we started regaining market share, and I won an award. That all fits in a 3 or 4 line bullet. And suddenly the hiring manager says, oh, this guy's a star.
And it's interesting because that was almost what you described as what usually people do is what I've done, putting a very short description that can fit on a single line saying it grew sales by 20%, but to actually put it into a story framework where you can describe it in 3 to 4 short sentences. I never realized how impactful that could be on the receiving end, the hiring manager wondering who can solve our problems here.
So there's a bunch of rules about resumes, right? One of them is keep your bullet point short. Always put a number in your bullet point. Start with an active verb. There's also try to keep it on 1 page. All of these rules are basically wrong. They guide you into making a worse resume, basically. Now, shorter is maybe better, but not at the expense of putting a number in is great, but not if you don't put some context around it so I know whether it's good or bad. Starting with an action verb, okay, use action verbs, but that's not what often people do is they put the action verb in, which means that they don't then talk about the problem that they were solving. So nobody ever knows about the problem. They don't know that you had this amazing impact. So I think all the rules are wrong, basically. The one pager is also wrong, right? Particularly if you're a product manager, because you can't get a product management job without multiple years of experience as doing work, typically as sort of doing important work in a business. Well, that means your resume, you have a lot of stories to tell, a lot of stuff to communicate about you. And the hiring manager is only going to read the first half page, but it needs to be engaging and make them think, oh, I should talk to this person. And then they might check out some of the other stuff and your education and that. But they don't care about how long it is. They're going to read the first half page. They say, I think I'm scan the rest, look at the end. Do they have an education? Okay, let's get this person. They don't care how long it is.
And it's some great information, and it's important to know what things we were taught that are wrong or just aren't relevant to us today anymore. It is so important. And that landscape of just ever-changing advice is something that we need to keep our ear to the ground with. I wanted to ask more about the changes in the workforce since COVID, because it feels like for the last 50 to 100 years, it was a privilege and an honor to work for a company where the companies had leverage. Now, since COVID, working from home, it seems wages are finally starting to increase for the lower middle class, but barely. They seem to have a little bit more leverage now where the companies need to court the employees a bit more as well. Do you kind of see this dynamic shift within, I guess, just the way that people present themselves, the storytelling, the resumes? Are you seeing any changes within workplaces and the workforce?
It's actually sort of the opposite, at least in product management and a lot of these technical roles, because there's a couple reasons. One is there was a big hiring bump in product managers in the early 2020s. A lot of those people have been laid off. So there's a bunch of experienced product managers in the market looking for work. So you're competing with, and everybody wants the job. It's the hottest job. Everybody wants a job. It pays well. It's very exciting. It's the best job in the world, in my opinion. So there's a ton of competition for this job. And it's very qualified as a rule, this competition. So simply being a qualified candidate doesn't get you very far in the job search. It gets you out of 1,000 resumes, maybe 100 people are highly qualified, but the hiring manager wants 10 to go further on. So you have to set yourself apart from highly qualified. That is the situation in product management. It's possible that's changing, but it's never going to go to the point where you can get every product management job you apply for if you have no spelling errors in your resume. That's just not happening again, right?
Right. You're telling me I can't walk into a warehouse or a factory, shake the manager's hand, and get a job the same day?
Well, if you want to work in a factory, you might be able to as a factory worker, but not as a product manager, right? Product managers are 1% to 2% of the workforce in a high-tech company, which means there's not very many of us. It's like, we're not as rare as CEOs, but we're probably the next rarest role with that company. Maybe product marketing. There should be more product marketers than there are. There should probably be more product managers than there are, but they're both very rare jobs.
Absolutely.
And they're very overhead because the things that we work on today don't have an impact on the business often for 6 months to a year to 2 years, depending on the size of the business. So it's very easy for companies to say, oh, I'm going to get rid of the product managers and so I can make my number this quarter. And it's a bad idea, but you might potentially get a benefit out of it this quarter.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of those business decisions are short-sighted, where they're not looking at the medium and long-term impact and success that something can have. They need instant results, the instant gratification, just to make the
Very
numbers
much.
look good that quarter, like you said. It's unfortunate.
Yeah. I was thinking about this whole idea of the resume as longer than a page. And one of the things that we learn when we start talking about marketing or learning about marketing is that the sales page for your product can be any length. It doesn't have to be short. It can be long. It just has to be engaging, right? It has to do all the things it needs to do to persuade the prospect to buy or to click on the free trial link or whatever it might be. The resume is the same deal. The resume is a sales page. In fact, I even talk about the resume as not being a summary section and experience section. I talk about it as there's a value proposition, and then there's the demo. The experience section is a demo. Let me show you all the cool things I've done for other people just like you. It doesn't say, let me show you all the features and functions. This is the file menu, and you can go new, you can go open. You don't do it that way, and that's what most of them are. You say, let me show you how I solve this big problem that probably you have or somebody who has that you might find interesting about how I went about doing it. And the impact was really big.
That is absolutely incredible. Now, with different tools that are coming out, there have always been resume builders or services to what success you would have is up for debate. But with some of the new AI tools and large language models, they're becoming more sophisticated and advanced. Do you see AI as being a beneficial tool for resume building or storytelling if you can give it the right framework?
I use ChatGPT in my coaching. What I've found though is it's not good at, you have to give it the story. If you give it the story, or maybe the bullet points that are the highlights of the story, there was this problem. Here are the symptoms. Well, here's what I did. Well, here's the impact that we had. Well, if you give it that story, it can do two things. One is it can write a really good narrative version of that story. It's usually a little bit right. It said, oh, the results were remarkable. You have to sort of tone that down a little bit. But you can essentially use that story in the interview. If somebody says, well, tell me about this bullet point, you can essentially use that story that ChatGPT wrote. You have to be very careful, of course, because it might have made some things up or whatever. But the other thing it can do, and this is because I have my ChatGPT instance knows how I do this, it can create a draft bullet point for you. And here's what the format of the bullet point is. There's a problem, there's something you did, and it had these results. And it does an okay job about 80% of the time. Always needs work. Sometimes it leaves out the problem. And then if you ask it about what it's doing, it will be wrong. It will say, oh, it knows so much about resumes from the internet that are wrong. It says, well, I always start with an active verb and I use a quantitative. It's like, that's not what you're doing actually, but it doesn't know that it's not doing that.
It's very true. The model can be only as good as the information that it's fed. So it's using some
information that is not in my view, but that's very common. So the bottom line is, from my experience so far, it is not good at eliciting the story, but it's good at, once you have the story, helping you turn it into a bullet point. The other thing I use it for is if I write the bullet point myself, I will have it help me shorten it. And it does a good job of that often. Again, you have to try multiple times, and sometimes it leaves out things that I don't want it to, so I have to be stern with it. But generally, it's definitely a tool that I use, and I find it very valuable for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just like any other tool out there, it's how you as a user use it. What is your intended end result? What are you trying to get out of it? And that can determine your results from the tools that you use. It's how you use it, just something in our arsenal. With everything that you're building, even though you're just in for a year, what are you most excited for going into 2025? Are you planning anything new or exciting? Or are you kind of doing the same of everything that's been working for you the last year?
So my big goal for 2025 is coming up with some scale. So figuring out what that is though, because one thing I found is people don't really want to buy, for example, a resume writing course. They want to be one-on-one with me, which it makes total sense. I mean, there's a huge amount of value in that, but it's just me and my time, and I'd rather have a little bit more scale there. The other thing is I really want to work on this go-to-market for companies component of the business and expand that. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity for how many times I talk to somebody who needs their resume done because the company they're working for, they think is going to go under. And I go look at their website and I say, I have no idea if I was the exact right client for this company, I would have no idea by looking at the website. And I feel like, well, that's low-hanging fruit, right? For a lot of companies, if they could fix that, but I suspect that their demos are not good, right? So you go to the demo and they're probably just demoing features and functions. That is where I would like to see some growth in the business as well. Because I just want there to be more successful products, particularly products that are good, but they haven't figured out how to sell. Because I've been in that situation before. I worked on a product back in the early 2000s that was an amazing product. It was a fantastic product for product managers. We never figured out how to sell it. And one of the reasons I got so into go-to-market, and nobody had taught me the stuff that we didn't do. And so we didn't do it. And as a result, the company failed. And I want to prevent that. I want to help other companies and product managers avoid that outcome. That's kind of my goal in life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's a lot of products out there that never even get the chance to really make it because unfortunately, a lot of those important foundational pieces aren't laid properly for them. And unfortunately, we also see a lot of terrible products that are wildly successful, but they don't deliver on their product at the end.
The thing that people tend to forget, and it's the exact right example to use. The idea behind the product, the problem that you're solving is the most important thing. If you're solving a problem that is meaningful to people, you can't have a product if you don't have that. The next most important thing is the go-to-market. If you can convince people that you will solve that problem for them, you can sell it. You don't need a product. And obviously products that are like fraudulent or things, that's how they sell, right? The product doesn't really exist, but people are sold on the value. The problem with product companies is that we tend to think that the product is the most important thing, and it's really not, right? The other two things are more important. The technology is not interesting really to buyers. It's what problem are you solving? And are you reaching the people that have that problem to tell them that there's a solution that's better than their other alternatives? And if you can do that, it doesn't matter that much about the product in the middle. Obviously, to be an ethical company, you have to solve that problem in reality. But the problem is sort of the third leg of that stool, and it's not the most important one. I know there's lots of products out there that solve problems that are worth solving, but the market doesn't know about them, and so they fail.
Absolutely. And nowadays, because you've worked with products and companies, services, I feel they're removing value, they're removing features, they're removing benefits, they're increasing the prices. There's a lack of competition. What the heck can we do to help these underdog products out there get their time to shine so we have more competition so that everyone can have more features, more benefits, and more competitive prices?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's lots of different levels of answer. There are certainly markets where there are effective monopolies, which is going to be hard to fight against those for the little guy. But one thing, there's lots of problems that aren't yet solved. There's lots of companies out there solving problems, but nobody knows it. You can't just blame competition for not being successful if you're not actually getting out to the people that have the problem you solve and telling them why your solution is a better one for them than their alternatives. You have to do that. And you have to have some proof about it. You have to be able to talk about your successful customers. Most customer success stories are about the company and the product. They're not about the successful customer and the pain that they are in. Because what you want to be able to do, this goes back to the storytelling. A good customer success story is all about how before they were a customer, they were in terrible pain. They searched for solution after solution, everything failed. Then they found us. Now their life is wonderful. We're one line in that story. One line is all we need to have in that story, because what you want the prospect to come in and say, oh, I'm suffering that same way. I tried all those things. My life is horrible. These people did one thing and now their life is great. I want to be like them. This is the secret of go-to-market. It's why the stories are so important, right? That does not work if you don't have the story of the tragedy of the prospect. That's what gets people excited about new products. And me excited, obviously. I mean, I'm talking faster, I'm getting louder. It's like, I love this stuff. I think it's so frustrating to me to see how many companies fail at this.
Absolutely. I think Google has literally pushed every known product available in the universe to market. And I don't know if it's because they have such a name brand, but they seem to kill off certain products when things aren't hitting just right, or it's not an instant success. Do you find that as an issue with product management and go-to-market, whether for business or for a career, just knowing when maybe the audience or the job I'm going for isn't the right fit, or maybe I need to relook at the messaging or what my offer is?
Well, Google's a very interesting example of this. Google essentially has a couple of successful products and has had many failed products. Why is this? I always think of Google Wave. I don't know if you even remember that. You might be too young. But Google Wave, they released this years ago. It was a very successful internal tool that they built. And it was kind of a chat, messaging, this and that. It was probably kind of like Notion or Slack or something like that. And they released it to the market. And they said, hey, look at this cool tool we did. It has all these features. And they didn't say who it was for. It didn't say anything about use cases that were ideal for it. It didn't give you predefined setups for particular types of interactions. So basically, it did everything wrong in go-to-market. Guess what happened to that product? It failed. The only reason we remember this is because Google is so big that the launch was actually something that kind of landed on our brains. Many little companies do the same thing. They launch a cool technology. They don't say who it's for, why it's useful. They don't help people get started. And of course, they go away and we don't ever remember them because they were not important enough to impinge on our brain. They might have been if they'd done go-to-market better. And I suspect there's a lot of other things at Google where they've tried to launch and failed. We just don't remember them. But Google is that unusual kind of beast that when they launch something and it fails, we remember it because it was big enough, right? Google Glass, same kind of deal. Google Circles or whatever that thing was called, or G Plus, whatever it was called. It was Circles. You know, that the problem with Circles was they didn't give us a reason to use it rather than Facebook. There probably was one. They didn't articulate it. They didn't make it like, oh, this is the obvious choice. I mean, lots of failures on Google's part for sure. Absolutely. And we can all learn. We can learn from them if we take the right lessons, which I think most people don't. Absolutely. The lesson of Google Glass was not that it wasn't a good product. The lesson was Google released it and said, here's a thing, try to figure out what to do with it. That's not the way you market a product. You say, oh, here's a thing. Anybody can buy it, but if you're in this particular industry and you're not using it, you're going to lose out because we built all this stuff that make your life 20 times better. It is on the onus of Google to figure out. If you remember the book Crossing the Chasm, it's the bowling pin strategy, the bowling alley strategy. What is the head pin, the market segment that needs your product so badly they will pay a premium to use it because they're in so much pain? Well, Google doesn't seem to do that, and it means that their product launches fail. We would be using AR in our lives if Google had not failed with Google Glass 10 years ago. Very frustrating to me. I really want AR to be working, and Google messed that up for us.
Darn you, Google. It would be really cool to have just the world popping up, price tags on things, or the history of something, or click to learn more, blink your right eye if you want audio to play, something cool like that.
Exactly, yeah. I would love that. I think that would be great. But I do think Google messed it up for the rest of us with their launch. Apple kind of did too, and with their headset. They needed to have also, same thing, they needed to have a use case that was so compelling for a segment, they could make enough money to keep the product going based on that segment. And then they keep investing, it gets better and better, and it gets more and more applicable to the rest of the market. That is what happened with all the successful disruptive innovations. They started that way. They started as not very good for most things, but really good for one particular thing. And I mean, we've got a long way from resumes at this point, but go-to-market go-to-market, you have to know who your target segment is, for whom your solution is the best solution, way better than the alternatives. If you haven't figured it out, you will fail. I mean, we've seen it a million times.
Absolutely.
So you have to figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sorry to take it away from resumes, but it was your past background and experience that I knew you would have some very insightful input into that. And just knowing, hey, you really have to solve a very big problem for a market that's willing to pay a premium, use that bowling alley strategy to knock that first pin down and then do things better. I think that's a really overlooked strategy and very smart.
And obviously I didn't make it up, but I do see most people not doing it. So
But
I think
just
the successful companies do. They either have done that or they've come up with an innovation that, I mean, like the other example I always like to use is Instagram. So Instagram, when it came out, I don't know if you remember the days before Instagram, all the photo apps had lots of dials and sliders. And they said, well, you can make your photo look as good as you want, dials and sliders. Instagram came out and said, we don't have dials and sliders. We have filters that are pre-built. If you click on a filter, your photo will look better. And sliders, your photo always looks worse when you do it, right? Unless you're a professional, your photo looks worse when you try to edit it. So what was the big difference between Instagram and other photo editors? Well, there were other differences, but one of the big ones was Instagram would make your pictures look better. The other ones made your pictures look worse. Which one are you going to choose? You're going to choose the one that makes your pictures look better, even if in reality, most people didn't even use filters. I mean, other advantages of Instagram as well. But to me, I saw that and I thought, okay, that's going to win. No question.
Absolutely. It's important to take a look at the past wins and failures of other product launches just to see what is working and what isn't and try to analyze that so we can use that for our benefit to help us.
Can I give you my other favorite example of storytelling in marketing?
Please do. That would be great.
So you know how Apple, they had the iPod billboards with the person, they were black and white originally with the white headphones, and they were like dancing. It was a static picture. All it said was iPod. Advertising works better when there's a story. When you can identify there's some kind of a pain, somebody got a solution that makes them happy. Well, the Apple iPod ads are exactly that, right? Somebody's dancing around. And you know what the story is, because in those days we all had Walkmans, which meant that we had about a dozen songs we could carry around, or 20. And if we wanted to have a different record, we had to get a different cassette, whatever. We couldn't mix them up. We couldn't shuffle them with the cassette ones. And then here comes, so this is a big pain if you like music. You want to listen to what you want to listen to right now. You're in the mood for something. So the iPod says, just in that one picture says, I can listen to whatever I want, whenever I want, and I'm dancing all the time, right? That's a great outcome. That's a great story. Sometimes Apple has these other ads, which are pictures of what I call beauty shots of the phone. And if you look at the sales process profile of Apple, when they market with beauty pictures, sales go down. When they market with stories, which is also shot on iPhone, sales go up. Down with beauty pictures, up with stories. The shot on iPhone is also a storytelling. There's a picture. What's happening in that picture? I don't know, but somebody thought it was interesting enough to take a picture of it. So I'm going to believe that there's a story behind it as a human being. Stories really work. And Apple forgets it every now and then when they start using beauty shots. And then they go back to shot on iPhone. I mean, look at how often they've gone back to shot on iPhone. This is why.
I really love those commercials because I was fascinated with the fact that you could have that sort of outputted end result from just an iPhone. I was like, wait, what? You're doing that
Yeah.
with that?
Well, everybody has some problem some story they can create on top of that. It's like, oh, think about what I would have had to do to take that picture with a camera versus a phone. Or something interesting happened here and they were able to capture that. I want to be able to do that. That's been a challenge. That's a problem in my life, whatever it might be. Or it might just be, there's something interesting happening in there. I wonder what it is, right? I mean, it just creates that sense of wonder. And obviously, because somebody took a picture, that means it was worth taking a picture of. And so that it intrinsically creates a story, even though you don't know what the story is. It's really amazing.
That is awesome. I love how the story kind of builds itself just through our
Yes.
own imagination, kind of similar to how reading does. We're kind of creating this, our own reality, our own
Yeah.
fantasy land within the story. That's incredible.
Exactly.
Now, for those who are interested in getting connected with you, where can they find out more and get connected with you online?
So the best place to connect with me is on LinkedIn, and I'm Nils Davis on LinkedIn, and I'm sure there'll be links. And if you are interested in the resume work, you can schedule a free resume review call with me by clicking on the link in my LinkedIn profile that says, make your resume amazing. So that's how to connect. That's how to get the resume side. I post lots of stuff about resumes, about product management, about storytelling, all kinds of different things. I have a newsletter. And so lots of ways to connect with me. But LinkedIn is the sort of the central hub.
I love that. Absolutely. And we will have those links available down in the show notes and the description. I'm already subscribed. I'm excited to see more of your content and learn more. Very
Fantastic.
exciting. Nils, appreciate taking the time, sharing these tips and tricks with us. Congratulations on your new business venture. Excited to see where this grows. I know you're going to do fantastic. Just keep up the great work out there.
Thank you very much. It's been delightful to be here. You are a great interview, and I've really enjoyed it.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Congratulations.
Thanks, Chris.